Sacramento are also advocating a change in the system to try to prevent what happened at this boarding house on F Street from happening again.
Imagine trusting someone to care for your most vulnerable family member. Imagine the relief of knowing they've found a safe place to call home, with a kind landlady who bakes cookies and serves meals. Now imagine discovering that beneath the floorboards and buried in the backyard garden, 7 bodies lie in unmarked graves. This is not a horror movie. This is the true story of what happened on F Street in Sacramento, California, where evil wore the face of a grandmother and death came disguised as kindness. In the heart of Sacramento during the 1980s, a powder blue Victorian house at 1426 F Street stood as a beacon of hope for society's forgotten. The elderly, the mentally ill, the homeless, those struggling with addiction, they all found their way to the boarding house run by a woman named Dorothea Puente. With her grey hair, oversized glasses, and vintage clothing, she looked every bit the caring grandmother. She attended church regularly, cooked for her tenants, and helped them manage their social security benefits. To the outside world, she was a saint. To social workers desperate for placement options, she was a godsend. But Dorothea Puente had a dark past that few knew about. Born in California in 1929, she had already served time for drugging and robbing people in bars. In 1982, she was convicted of theft after drugging an elderly man and stealing his pension. Yet somehow, after her release, she was able to open her boarding house and begin accepting the most vulnerable members of society into her care. What happened next would shock an entire city and become one of the most notorious serial killer cases in California history. Between 1982 and 1988, Dorothea Puente was running a deadly operation. She would procure elderly and mentally disabled people to stay at her boarding house, often through referrals from well-meaning social workers. Once they were under her roof, she would poison them, typically using a sedative called Dalmane along with other prescription drugs. After they died, she would wrap their bodies in bed sheets and plastic, then bury them in her yard. The most chilling part: she would continue to cash their social security checks long after they were dead, collecting over $5,000 a month from her victims. The unraveling began in November 1988 with a man named Alvaro Montoya. Known as Bert to his friends, the 51-year-old had schizophrenia and developmental disabilities. Social worker Judy Moyes had worked hard to get him off the streets and into what she believed was a safe environment at Puente's boarding house. But when Montoya missed his appointments and stopped showing up to meetings, Judy became concerned. She contacted the police, unknowingly setting in motion one of the most shocking discoveries in Sacramento's history. On November 11, 1988, homicide detective John Cabrera and his team arrived at 1426 F Street. They were met by Dorothea Puente herself, who calmly explained that Montoya had simply gone on vacation. She was cooperative, almost friendly. She even offered the detectives coffee. When they asked to search the yard, she readily agreed and handed them an extra shovel. Then, in what would become one of the most brazen moves in criminal history, she asked if she could step out to buy a cup of coffee. The police said yes. Puente never came back. While she fled to Los Angeles, the detectives began to dig. Within hours, they uncovered the body of 78-year-old Leona Carpenter, then another body, and another. By the time they finished, 7 bodies had been exhumed from the backyard of the quaint Victorian house. The victims were Dorothy Miller, Benjamin Fink, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, Betty Palmer, Leona Carpenter, and the man they had been searching for, Alvaro Montoya. They ranged in age from 51 to 81 years old. The neighborhood was in shock. Neighbors reported having smelled something foul emanating from the property, but they had attributed it to the plumbing or perhaps a dead animal. No one suspected that a serial killer was operating in plain sight. The house where people came seeking refuge had become a death house. Meanwhile, Dorothea Puente was in Los Angeles, staying at a cheap motel and frequenting local bars. She struck up a conversation with an elderly man at one establishment, spinning stories and seeking sympathy. But the man recognized her face from the news coverage that had saturated California. He contacted the police, and on November 16th, Puente was arrested and flown back to Sacramento. As investigators dug deeper into her history, they connected her to 2 additional murders. Her boyfriend, 77-year-old Everson Gilmouth, had disappeared in 1985, His body had been found in a wooden box along the Sacramento River on New Year's Day 1986, but it took 3 years to identify him. Puente had been cashing his pension checks and forging letters to his family the entire time. They also reopened the case of Ruth Monroe, Puente's former business partner, who had died in 1982 from what was ruled a suicide by overdose. Monroe's family had always been suspicious, and the pattern was now undeniable. In total, Dorothea Puente was charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder. Her trial began in 1993 and lasted for months, becoming a media sensation. The prosecution called over 130 witnesses to the stand. They painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer who preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. The defense argued that while she might be a thief, the evidence didn't prove she was a murderer. Forensic pathologists testified that they couldn't definitively establish the cause of death for the victims, though Dalmain was found in all 7 bodies recovered from her yard. After 24 days of deliberation, one of the longest jury deliberations in California history, the verdict came down. Dorothea Puente was convicted of 3 murders, those of Dorothy Miller, Benjamin Fink, and Leona Carpenter. The jury deadlocked on the other 6 counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, until her death in 2011 at the age of 82. Dorothea Puente maintained her innocence. She claimed she had never killed anyone and that she had once been a very good person. But for the families of her victims, for the social workers who had unknowingly sent clients to their deaths, and for a community that had to reckon with the reality that evil can wear the most disarming disguise, her words rang hollow. The house on F Street still stands today. It was sold at auction and has become something of a dark tourism site, a reminder of one of Sacramento's darkest chapters. The case of Dorothea Puente forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how society treats its most vulnerable and how trust can be weaponized by those with malicious intent. The story of the serial killer on F Street is a chilling reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. They can look like your grandmother, your neighbor, the person serving you coffee. If this case has taught us anything, it's that we must remain vigilant and that our most vulnerable deserve protection and dignity, not exploitation. If you found this story as compelling and disturbing as we did, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into true crime history. Leave a comment below telling us what you think about this case, and if there are other stories you'd like us to cover, let us know. Share this video with anyone who appreciates true crime storytelling that respects the victims while examining the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay safe out there.